接下来第一个议程是拥抱开放、瞬间互通 （Commitment to Open Interoperability）。我们的欢迎 Murray
Taylor。Okay, good morning. My name is Murray Taylor, and I appreciate the welcome that Vincent gave all of our team here today. And I'm actually going to be building on a couple of themes that Vincent just talked about just now in terms of he highlighted some of the major trends that are occurring in the IT industry, and specifically how some of those are relating to Microsoft's transformation in terms of becoming a data and services company. And quite there. And specifically what I'm wanting to be talking about this morning is the relationship between some of these trends and interoperability, and how Microsoft is moving in a direction to really extend and expand the level of interoperability that we currently do. Oh, okay. One moment. Okay, that's better. That was a picture of some mountains in Washington in the US, but we'll be talking about interoperability instead. Okay, so one thing I want to cover here is that there's a statement here that Microsoft as an organization has changed and become more open. And what this is really referring to is to say that it's a very broad statement, and it's relating to how Microsoft has been in the business of delivering interoperability for many years. But there are some changes, as I just was alluding to, in terms of what's happening in the industry that is accelerating and increasing the need for interoperability. Specifically, what I'm getting at there is that as we talk to many of our customers, they're living more in mixed environments. So in other words, using software from Microsoft, open source, a range of other companies. The key thing being that companies are wanting to maximize the value of their IT investment, and being able to do that by able to select and choose the appropriate combinations of software and hardware. So that's one of the themes here. The other area is the really pervasiveness of customers as they're transitioning to the cloud in various forms. We've all heard about this, and I'm sure many of the organizations here are on that journey. And part of what's occurring with that transition to using cloud-based systems is also it's opening up more opportunities for customers in terms of how much of their workloads do they run on premise, how much do they run in the cloud, how much is in mixed mode environments. And I want to move from a very generic discussion here to talk about specifically about what Microsoft has been doing around a number of areas of our businesses. We talk about this term a devices and services company, and hopefully as we go through this session just now, I'll try to give some specific examples which would clarify what that actually is, and so that you'll get a view as to Microsoft, a very large organization, is very much making some changes and becoming more engaged in interoperability across the range of our businesses here. So in terms of trying to structure this, I want to think about three main areas here. When we talk about playing well with others, that's a term really for saying how does Microsoft engage with other companies, with other organizations through standards, and how standards underpin many of the things that we're doing so that we can live in a world of interoperability, supporting customers who have a far higher degree of interoperability than they may have done in the past. The listening to our customers. This is specifically a comment in relation to, as we're working with our customers, that they are wanting to see how they can extend beyond just using pure Microsoft solutions, how Microsoft solutions work well in combinations of other components. Overall, the point here is to recognize that how we can assist customers to achieve the maximum value in their investments. And the last one here, open in the cloud. Microsoft is in a fairly unique position because as well as having a public cloud offering with Azure, we also have private cloud facilities in terms of through Microsoft Hyper-V. So you can move from an on-premise solution through private cloud to public cloud. And one thing we're looking at here is what we call a cloud OS. And a cloud OS, just in our terminology, is the ability to have basically the opportunity for customers to move their workloads both from on-premise into full public cloud or private cloud, various formats of that, but in a way so that it's as least disruptive as possible, so that it makes the most value of your investments. You don't need to redevelop to say, well, I'm running it on-premise or I'm running it in the public cloud. Okay. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the standards that we do invest in, but also it's around open source. And so this is something that it's maybe unusual to hear Microsoft talking so much about open source. But as we go through this presentation today, I think you'll get a bit of a perspective as to how much we actually do now work with open source organizations in many ways, both contributing directly to open source solutions that engage open source software, and also just sort of saying, how can we enable open source to work on our platforms? We've done a lot of work here in areas such as Linux, running on Hyper-V and Azure, and also just actually open source applications running on Windows Server themselves. Okay, standards. So this isn't something that's happened overnight. This is something that Microsoft has been engaged with many standards bodies, working groups over many years. The reason why I'm raising this just now is really to say it's essential for interoperability that Microsoft continues to grow our presence, and we've got a lot of examples here where we're very much proactive in terms of working with some of these groups. I've just got a few major standards organizations and bodies that are along there on the bottom. Just to pick one, the W3C, that's the Open Web Platform, which is based upon HTML5, but also leverages a number of other components like CSS3 and SVG, XML. So in other words, Microsoft is not just making a bet on one particular area. We see it's necessary to look across the breadth of standards and to make sure that we can contribute there so that customers can have confidence that if we're leveraging those standards, then that they equally can leverage those standards and collectively have a greater assurance as to where their workloads will be able to run in the future. Okay, everybody, I'm sure, is very well aware of Windows, and in terms of, it's worthwhile just taking a moment to look at some of the scale of what we have with Windows. Something in the order of 1.3 billion Windows systems in the world. We're getting a high rate of adoption of Windows 8, 200 million copies sold to date. And so what this is saying here is to say this ecosystem of Windows is absolutely based upon standards to help that ecosystem thrive and grow. We can show many examples of how Windows, and as we go through some of the material we'll be talking about today, it does leverage standards to a very broad extent. Part of this is working with our partners. We see we've got 640,000 partners globally. And the way we work with these partners is by being open, being transparent about some of the developments that we're doing. And so there's an interesting stat over there on the right-hand side there, which is to say, for every dollar that Microsoft makes, there's an average that our partners make of $9.25. So there's a significant multiplier effect there in terms of, as Microsoft leverages the Windows platform, it helps the broader ecosystem. It helps the partners who are working with hardware and software solutions in that area there. Okay. In terms of looking forward, one of the areas that to discuss is in relation to emerging standards. A number of you are familiar with OneDrive. It used to be branded SkyDrive. The name consistently will be used around the world is OneDrive. And the key thing about OneDrive is that the goal of it is to say that to have a single place where you can store your data so it can be accessible by any platform, any application, and any device. Very broad goals. The only way you would be able to achieve that is by leveraging a number of these emerging standards. So I think what you'll continue to see is that as Microsoft makes investments in this area, that OneDrive will continue to be a key part of that. An example terms of moving from just a pure Microsoft-centric view would be to say, with OneDrive, you can use ODF, the OpenDoc format, with the Office web apps to allow you to access documents which are in open source suites like OpenOffice, so that there's very much an extension, an ability to have inclusion of other areas there to help us demonstrate that OneDrive can be a single platform that can be used across many areas there. Okay, another area here with regards to Windows Phone. We're absolutely making sure that we aim to have Windows Phone as a platform based upon HTML5, common standards there, plus a number of other open source development frameworks such as jQuery and PhoneGap and so forth. And we see this as the logical way to make accessibility to developers so that they can use a breadth of tools, both open source and other ones, to develop applications, and they can have the confidence that those will be supported in the Microsoft Windows Phone environment. Okay, so just sort of carrying on some of this theme of just looking across the breadth of Microsoft, and that's really what I'm just trying to do here, is to show that Microsoft has got a presence in many areas, and each of these areas is looking at interoperability, looking for ways that we can extend and grow that so that we can support the ability for customers to have their applications, their workloads, and to gain value from those. With regards to Office, both from an on-premise offering in terms of the Office that people are familiar with, and with a cloud service-based version with Office 365, absolutely based on standards here with OpenXML, ODF, and so forth, and really using interoperability. Like an example of that would be Office for Mac, where a highly used application, and that is really enabled by OpenXML. So we are very much committed to making sure that Office becomes that platform that can be enabled by a range of areas there. And not, as I'm just getting at there, not just in terms of on Windows itself, but looking at its availability on other devices as well. And I think, yeah. Sorry? Office for Android. Maybe one of my colleagues will comment on that. No? No? Okay, so. Okay. All right. So we've covered a fair bit of the landscape here. In terms of Windows Server 2012 R2, what we've done with that is moved our operating system from being, you think of as something as a pure on-premise offering, to moving this to what we're calling a operating system, this cloud OS concept, which can operate as in a hybrid mode. So in other words, you can build applications, run them on Windows Server. You've got the ability for portability to run those either on Hyper-V or on Azure. And a number of the investments we've been doing in Windows Server is specifically around how we can enable standards to allow customers to run a range of open source applications, use open source development tools in Windows Server, so they can think of that as a common platform. Okay, now moving from specifically a Microsoft product focus to thinking about Microsoft in the open source area, I've just got up here a range of common open source, well-known tools here. And there's a story behind each one of these in terms of things that Microsoft is doing, and I just want to highlight a couple of these. I'm not going to be going through all of them, but maybe just to pick an example of what we're doing at an operating system level, i.e. with Linux, looking at some of the things we're doing in the data area with Hadoop, and also in some development language areas like PHP. So Microsoft and Linux, this has actually come a long way in the last few years. And Microsoft is absolutely committed to making Linux a first-class citizen on Hyper-V and Azure. Now, at first thought that might sound like a very unusual statement for Microsoft to be making, but as I said, as we talk to customers, there are many times they've got workloads which are already running on Linux. They want to have the ability to have a common platform where they can run Windows guests and they can run Linux guests as well. And so we see it's in the best interests of our customers to be able to provide a common infrastructure so that you don't have customers having to run a separate Linux environment and a separate Windows environment. That the goal here is to say, how can we implement either a public or private cloud and enable Linux to be running on that with a level of performance, a level of functionality as equivalent as they would get in a native environment. This work is actually done in the group that I work in Redmond, so it's an area that's near and dear to my heart. And it's an area where we're not just talking about add-ons here. When we're talking about supporting Linux, what we are doing is actually contributing code to the Linux kernel itself. So in other words, customers won't need to have a separate download to get access to what we're calling here Linux integration services. Linux integration services is the suite of drivers which enable functionality and performance of Linux in Microsoft environments. So by contributing to the Linux kernel, we're ensuring that as distros obtain as they obtain the distros from that Linux kernel, they automatically get these components. So it simplifies it for customers because they don't need to do separate downloads, they don't need to do separate maintenance. By virtue of working with those distros, they're getting those benefits and making it as simple as possible for customers. And on the next slide, I've just got some examples of the range of distros that we're working with, because we're not just targeting one or two. We're aiming to look at across the landscape there of all of the major Linux distros, so that whichever one customers are running, they have that capability that they will be able to run this on Hyper-V or on Windows Azure. The focus here is actually on Linux, but we also do similar work in terms of enabling drivers to work on BSD Unix as well, particularly appropriate for the virtual appliance market there. So what this slide here is showing is the range of distros and the levels, just to give you a bit of a snapshot as to where our investment is going. And our goal here is to stay current with the distros in terms of as new levels of whether it's Red Hat or SUSE are delivered, we will continue to make those investments. So from a functionality, from a performance point of view, it's not a one-off investment, that there's a need for customers to have the confidence that Microsoft is in this for the long haul. And we've been able to work with a range of customers here so that they have been able to successfully build mixed mode environments in the sense of single hypervisor, a single public cloud running Linux and Windows workloads side by side. At the other side here is looking at from a management point of view, so not necessarily just from an operating system perspective, but if we think about System Center, Operations Manager, System Center, Configuration Manager, our goal there is to make it easier for customers from an interoperability perspective to say you can have one suite of management tools which allow you to manage both Linux and Windows guests or Unix guests for that matter. So you again simplifying the environment there by not having to have multiple tool sets to do the same work, whether it's about monitoring, whether it's about deployment, whether it's about maintenance. We see this as a key goal of ours so that we can enable Azure and Hyper-V to be platforms of choice for running Linux or Windows. Okay. Just to run through a couple of specific examples, Hadoop, clearly a very major open source data platform. And what Microsoft's been doing here is both for Windows Azure and for Windows Server, we've got these add-ins for HD Insight, which allow us to make it a lot easier and simpler for customers to leverage Hadoop, get the value of that data analysis, and use common sets of tools through Microsoft to get what they're really looking for, the analysis from those very large volumes of data there. Another area here is Microsoft's investment with Java. So we're looking to make also Java operate as a very high-performing language in the Microsoft environment. We've done a significant amount of work with a plugin for Eclipse, so that means that it enables people to use Eclipse as a development environment to generate their applications and to deploy those applications in Microsoft environments. Another one here is with PHP. If we were having this conversation probably about 3 years ago, the answer would have been PHP doesn't really run on Windows. We've made a major investment with PHP. Again, this is another development area which is in the group that I'm in Redmond. So it's one where we've worked extensively with the PHP community. And the level of performance, for example, we've been able to get with PHP is equivalent to PHP running natively on Linux. So we've been doing a fair amount of benchmarking in that area. And it's just an indication that it's not just a limited level of investment. It's very much looking to say, how can we help customers have a greater level of choice there? So whether they're wanting to run their PHP applications on Linux or Windows, it gives them more options there. And as each of the PHP releases comes out for Linux, we're in lockstep with those in terms of making sure that customers don't need to feel, oh, well, if it's PHP on Windows, it's going to be significantly behind. That's not actually the case. We're very much up to date and current in that regard. Okay. So just trying to sort of look at what Microsoft's doing in open source all up. One area here is CodePlex, which is essentially Microsoft's project for hosting open source applications. We've got about 32,000 projects hosted in CodePlex itself. And over the last couple of years, we've had very significant growth, over 1 million members of that. And this is a good indication that it's more than just providing capability which nobody's using. That there is strong recognition and value is being perceived by the industry, and using what we're actually providing there as substance for what Microsoft's doing in the open source world there. Microsoft Web Matrix is a lightweight development framework which allows you to use open source tools to develop applications. We've had more than 1 million downloads of that. And so again, it sort of complements what we're talking about there in the CodePlex area by showing customers are now seeing Microsoft in somewhat of a different light, and accessibility of open source tools working in Windows environments there. And also like 9 out of the 10 of the 10 most downloaded open source projects run on Windows. We're very much looking at a very broad front as well as depth and capability there. Okay, some of you may have heard this recently, and this is about Microsoft has joined the Open Compute project. And this is a really interesting initiative. And what it really means is that rather than just Microsoft joining this organization, Microsoft has actually contributed what we call our cloud server specifications. In other words, these are the specifications for the servers that we run in all of our data centers for Bing, Azure, and so forth, offering that up to the Open Compute project as a way of saying, here's the best practices that Microsoft actually uses internally. And we've been finding that this should be a very significant benefit to customers. Just to rattle off a few numbers here, if you compare these specifications with what we've been doing in the past in terms of improvements in server design and so forth, there's around about a 40% reduction in total cost of servers. There is about a 50% reduction in operational costs. We found that when we looked at our servers worldwide, by implementing these cloud server specifications, it saved us in the order of about 1,000 miles of cabling in the data centers. So very significant environmental and cost factors for organizations. So as well as actually providing these specifications to organizations, the other thing that we've actually done is we have open sourced the actual software that we use for hardware operational management. Offered this to the Open Compute project. So that means, again, the best practices that we use internally, we're offering those up and delivering them in an open source way, so customers who are building out their own data centers have access to that. In terms of the logic for why Microsoft is doing this, it's very clear why we're doing this, which is to say what we're using to run our own public clouds, our own IT services here, the more that becomes standardized, the more that becomes common for customers who are wanting to make moves from using workloads, applications on their own premise to looking at a public cloud. The greater level of consistency there, the easier it is for them to make transitions to move in any direction they want, whether they want to run their own data center, whether they want to run in a hybrid mode, whether they want to leverage a public cloud like Azure. So it really is a very significant announcement, and it really is a demonstration of Microsoft looking beyond just immediate goals, but looking very much into the future as to where customers may want to get to, maybe not now, but over a period of time, and providing essentially these blueprints of how we run our own servers internally. Okay, another one here is just indication, going back to the theme about running Linux on Hyper-V, and this is one where you've got the SUSE Cloud. SUSE Cloud is basically a mechanism for allowing you to simply deploy private clouds, and Hyper-V is now being adopted by SUSE as one of their supported hypervisors. So it will allow customers to say, if you want to use SUSE Cloud to run Linux workloads, you've now got the ability to use the same hypervisor there as you may be running for your own Windows workloads as well. Okay, so that just moving on to the from playing well with others to listening to customers. This is really talking about how we are helping our customers to, what I'm calling here, maximize their IT investments. This is all about customers working in mixed mode environments where they're using a range of different software from different vendors. We've got many customers here. I've just put a handful up here. The reason why these ones have just popped up here, it's examples of customers where either we've been working to help them establish virtualized environments using Hyper-V or Azure to run Linux alongside their Windows workloads, or using System Center, Operations Manager, Config Manager to do the management and support of those facilities. So really the aim here is to say it's very much a feedback mechanism we're looking at to try to make sure that we can accommodate and understand where customers are going on this journey. Okay, the last area I want to talk about here is open in the cloud. And I think Microsoft has got a fairly unique position here when we're talking about what we do in the cloud. And really this relates to the fact that we're essentially the only organization that operates across the spectrum in the sense of a very major presence with a public cloud offering with Azure, various hybrid offerings, and on-premise offerings. So customers can have one single opportunity there to use as we keep referring to this cloud OS, the ability to have a consistent platform irrespective of where they actually want to run their workloads there. Just a few statistics here from when we're looking at what Microsoft does here, and probably just these three groups here. That the first one is sort of just indicating the capabilities that we have in terms of the number of services that we run, the depth of experience we've established. The cloud investment we're here for the long run. We've already made very large financial investments in terms of what we've done to date. That continues to increase year on year, so that there can be certainly no question that Microsoft will continue to have a very major presence and sees this as a key area for going forward. And the last area is to sort of say how well do we do it? What level of operational expertise have we developed over the years here? So one thing here is to think about what I want to term is a sort of like a virtuous circle. Because we have the a Windows Server, we have Hyper-V and private cloud, and we've got Windows Azure as a public cloud, we run many services, and of course these are some of the headline ones, but there's a number of other ones there as well. Point I'm just making here is the learnings we get from operating these large services are fed back into the development of how we're doing Windows Server, how we're doing Hyper-V. So for customers, it's irrespective of which environment you're running your workloads in, you're getting this feedback loop, which ensures that the learnings go in both directions. As improvements are made in Windows Server, they're made available in Azure and back and forth and so on. Okay. We've talked about this a little bit, but just to emphasize a couple of things here. When we talk about this Cloud OS, this is emphasizing, this isn't an either-or discussion in terms of the ability to run applications either on-premise or in the public cloud. And we've done a lot of work to try to ensure that there's a capability so that customers can actually move their workloads from either environment, from running on your own premise to in the public cloud. The key to this is it only works if you've got an organization that can deliver across all of these key areas in terms of identity, virtualization, DevOps, management, and so forth. And our goal is to try to have standardization as far as possible, so that whether it's from an operational perspective, whether it's from a management perspective, whether it's from deployment, all of these areas, we're trying to make this a consistent experience so that the cost and the impact of customers, if they're wanting to move workloads in either of these directions, is reduced. In terms of Windows Azure, this is just indicating that it's very far from being a proprietary environment. We talked a lot about running different operating systems, Linux and Unix on Azure, but it's also, you can see that the range of languages which you can run on Windows Azure, different frameworks, devices, and so forth. So it's very much positioning Windows Azure as a platform that, irrespective of the type of open source software you want, we're aiming to cover all of the key areas there. And basically trying to provide Windows Azure as a service that it can be, it can meet customers' needs however varied they are. Okay, so that was covering the landscape in a very broad level, talking about how the things that Microsoft is doing enable interoperability across the company. I just wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about what's going to be happening over the next couple of days here. And this session that we're having, this Plugfest just now, is one of a series of events which we run on a worldwide basis. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of the sort of pedigree here, we've run 27 of these Plugfests and Interop events over the past 5 years. Had a lot of different participants, over 1,200 participants, 160 unique companies. And you can see that the range of different organizations from different verticals, government, different sectors of industry. So we are very much committed to having these events on an ongoing basis. This is the fourth one we've been doing here in Taiwan, and we're committed to continuing to do these. We see there's a lot of value in these because it does actually enable customers to get some tangible results, so that it's not just a lecture format. It's very much trying to engage with customers on a one-on-one level so that they can actually help them to build hardware and software solutions. And we have, as we've worked with customers over a period of time, we've got a number of good success stories where customers have come to these type of events, they've worked with us, had a early device or piece of software and want to enable that so that they can get interoperability with Windows, Office, and so forth, and understanding how those protocols work and how to achieve success with it. So we see the sort of proof is in the pudding, in the sense that it's more than just sharing information. It's about helping to make customers successful here. And we will actually be also talking about Message Analyzer during this, which is a key tool which you'll find as you're working with protocols to help you do analysis and diagnostic functions. We've got some hands-on sessions there. Okay, so that's what we've been doing in the past. Commitment here is to say we will continue to run these type of events, these Plugfest Interop events, around about 6 to 7 a year. We adjust them based on what customer needs are. It's not a standard formula. We improve them. It's based upon what new developments are occurring, new challenges happening there. We work absolutely in key industry events like SNIA and Kerberos, very active in those areas. And we see that there needs to be support for customers so that ongoing development of diagnostic and testing tools like Message Analyzer, which I just mentioned, that's also developed out of the group that I work in Redmond, and so it's hand in hand with these events here. So just to indicate that there is going to be a significant amount of new information shared at this event over the next few days. We have just had a spring update of specifications relating to Windows 8.1, Server 2012 R2, some new content there, and you can see some of the protocol highlights, which again we'll be covering in depth with BYOD, mobile device management, and Hyper-V host data storage. So a lot of new material coming up here, and I would encourage you to sort of connect with the experts that we've got here, so that these are areas which are of particular interest to you, we're available to support you and help you. So here's the areas which I'm sure you'll have seen from the agenda. We'll be covering Windows, Office, SharePoint, SQL, Exchange, format, presentations like this. There will be some demonstrations. I think we've got a considerable number of people signed up for one-on-one sessions. If you haven't already, there'll be an opportunity for you to meet with some of the folks here who've got a lot of subject matter expertise, and also for you to build some ongoing connections to know that we're accessible and available to support you on going forward. So with that, I hope you enjoy the next 3 days. Okay? Thank you.